It was no effort to Catherine to believe that Henry Tilney could never be wrong. His manner might sometimes surprise, but his meaning must always be just. And what she did not understand, she was almost as ready to admire as what she did. The whole walk was delightful, and though it ended too soon, its conclusion was delightful too. Her friends attended her into the house, and Miss Tilney, before they parted, addressing herself with respectful form, as much to Mrs. Allen as to Catherine, petitioned for the pleasure of her company to dinner on the day after the next. No difficulty was made on Mrs. Allen's side, and the only difficulty on Catherine's was in concealing the excess of her pleasure. The morning had passed away so charmingly as to banish all her friendship and natural affection, for no thought of Isabella or James had crossed her during their walk. When the Tilneys were gone, she became amiable again, but she was amiable for some time to little effect. Mrs. Allen had no intelligence to give that could relieve her anxiety. She had heard nothing of any of them. Towards the end of the morning, however, Catherine, having occasion for some indispensable yard of ribbon, which must be bought without a moment's delay, walked out into the town, and in Barnes Street overtook the second Miss Thorpe as she was loitering towards Edgar's Buildings between two of the sweetest girls in the world, who had been her dear friends all the morning. From her she soon learned that the party to Clifton had taken place. "They set off at 8 this morning," said Miss Anne, "and I am sure I do not envy them their drive. I think you and I are very well off to be out of the scrape. It must be the dullest thing in the world, for there is not a soul at Clifton at this time of year. Belle went with your brother, and John drove Maria." Catherine spoke the pleasure she really felt on hearing this part of the arrangement. "Oh yes," rejoined the other, "Maria is gone. She was quite wild to go. She thought it would be something very fine. I cannot say I admire her taste, and for my part I was determined from the first not to go if they pressed me ever so much." Catherine, a little doubtful of this, could not help answering, "I wish you could have gone too. It is a pity you could not all go." "Thank you, but it is quite a matter of indifference to me. Indeed, I would not have gone on any account. I was saying so to Emily and Sophia when you overtook us." Catherine was still unconvinced, but glad that Anne should have the friendship of an Emily and a Sophia to console her. She bade her adieu without much uneasiness, and returned home, pleased that the party had not been prevented by her refusing to join it, and very heartily wishing that it might be too pleasant to allow either James or Isabella to resent her resistance any longer. Chapter 15. Early the next day, a note from Isabella, speaking peace and tenderness in every line, and entreating the immediate presence of her friend on a matter of the utmost importance, hastened Catherine, in the happiest state of confidence and curiosity, to Edgar's Buildings. The two youngest Miss Thorpes were by themselves in the parlour, and on Anne's quitting it to call her sister, Catherine took the opportunity of asking the other for some particulars of their yesterday's party. Maria desired no greater pleasure than to speak of it, and Catherine immediately learnt that it had been altogether the most delightful scheme in the world, that nobody could imagine how charming it had been, and that it had been more delightful than anybody could conceive. Such was the information of the first 5 minutes. The second unfolded thus much in detail, that they had driven directly to the York Hotel, ate some soup and bespoke an early dinner, walked down to the pump-room, tasted the water and laid out some shillings in purses and spars. Thence, adjourned to eat ice at a pastry-cook's, and hurrying back to the hotel, swallowed their dinner in haste, to prevent being in the dark, and then had a delightful drive back, only the moon was not up, and it rained a little, and Mr. Morland's horse was so tired he could hardly get it along. Catherine listened with heartfelt satisfaction. It appeared that Blaise Castle had never been thought of, and as for all the rest, there was nothing to regret for half an instant. Maria's intelligence concluded with a tender effusion of pity for her sister Anne, whom she represented as insupportably cross, from being excluded the party. "She will never forgive me, I am sure, but you know how could I help it? John would have me go, for he vowed he would not drive her because she had such thick ankles. I dare say she will not be in good humour again this month, but I am determined I will not be cross. It is not a little matter that puts me out of temper." Isabella now entered the room with so eager a step, and a look of such happy importance as engaged all her friends' notice. Maria was without ceremony sent away, and Isabella, embracing Catherine, thus began, "Yes, my dear Catherine, it is so indeed. Your penetration has not deceived you. Oh, that arch eye of yours, it sees through everything." Catherine replied only by a look of wondering ignorance. "Nay, my beloved, sweetest friend," continued the other, "compose yourself. I am amazingly agitated, as you perceive. Let us sit down and talk in comfort. Well, and so you guessed it the moment you had my note, sly creature. Oh, my dear Catherine, you alone who know my heart can judge of my present happiness. Your brother is the most charming of men. I only wish I were more worthy of him. But what will your excellent father and mother say? Oh, heavens, when I think of them I am so agitated. Catherine's understanding began to awake, an idea of the truth suddenly darted into her mind, and with the natural blush of so new an emotion she cried out, "Good heaven! My dear Isabella, what do you mean? Can you really be in love with James?" This bold surmise, however, she soon learnt comprehended but half the fact. The anxious affection which she was accused of having continually watched in Isabella's every look and action, had in the course of their yesterday's party, received the delightful confession of an equal love. Her heart and faith were alike engaged to James. Never had Catherine listened to anything so full of interest, wonder, and joy. Her brother and her friend engaged. New to such circumstances, the importance of it appeared unspeakably great, and she contemplated it as one of those grand events, of which the ordinary course of life can hardly afford a return. The strength of her feelings she could not express. The nature of them, however, contented her friend. The happiness of having such a sister was their first effusion, and the fair ladies mingled in embraces and tears of joy. Delighting, however, as Catherine sincerely did, in the prospect of the connection, it must be acknowledged that Isabella far surpassed her in tender anticipations. "You will be so infinitely dearer to me, my Catherine, than either Anne or Maria. I feel that I shall be so much more attached to my dear Morland's family than to my own." This was a pitch of friendship beyond Catherine. "You are so like your dear brother," continued Isabella, "that I quite doted on you the first moment I saw you. But so it always is with me, the first moment settles everything. The very first day that Morland came to us last Christmas, the very first moment I beheld him, my heart was irrecoverably gone. I remember I wore my yellow gown with my hair done up in braids, and when I came into the drawing-room and John introduced him, I thought I never saw anybody so handsome before." Here Catherine secretly acknowledged the power of love, for though exceedingly fond of her brother and partial to all his endowments, she had never in her life thought him handsome. "I remember, too, Miss Andrews drank tea with us that evening, and wore her puce-coloured sarcenet, and she looked so heavenly that I thought your brother must certainly fall in love with her. I could not sleep a wink all night for thinking of it. Oh, Catherine, the many sleepless nights I have had on your brother's account. I would not have you suffer half what I have done. I am grown wretchedly thin, I know, but I will not pain you by describing my anxiety. You have seen enough of it. I feel that I have betrayed myself perpetually, so unguarded in speaking of my partiality for the church, but my secret I was always sure would be safe with you." Catherine felt that nothing could have been safer, but ashamed of an ignorance little expected, she dared no longer contest the point, nor refuse to have been as full of arch penetration and affectionate sympathy as Isabella chose to consider her. Her brother, she found, was preparing to set off with all speed to Fullerton, to make known his situation and ask consent, and here was a source of some real agitation to the mind of Isabella. Catherine endeavoured to persuade her, as she was herself persuaded, that her father and mother would never oppose their son's wishes. "It is impossible," said she, "for parents to be more kind or more desirous of their children's happiness. I have no doubt of their consenting immediately." "Morland says exactly the same," replied Isabella, "and yet I dare not expect it. My fortune will be so small, they never can consent to it. Your brother, who might marry anybody." Here Catherine again discerned the force of love. "Indeed, Isabella, you are too humble. The difference of fortune can be nothing to signify." "Oh, my sweet Catherine, in your generous heart I know it would signify nothing, but we must not expect such disinterestedness in many. As for myself, I am sure I only wish our situations were reversed. Had I the command of millions, were I mistress of the whole world, your brother would be my only choice." This charming sentiment, recommended as much by sense as novelty, gave Catherine a most pleasing remembrance of all the heroines of her acquaintance, and she thought her friend never looked more lovely than in uttering the grand idea. "I am sure they will consent," was her frequent declaration. "I am sure they will be delighted with you." "For my own part," said Isabella, "my wishes are so moderate that the smallest income in nature would be enough for me. Where people are really attached, poverty itself is wealth. Grandeur I detest. I would not settle in London for the universe. A cottage in some retired village would be ecstasy. There are some charming little villas about Richmond." "Richmond," cried Catherine, "you must settle near Fullerton, you must be near us." "I am sure I shall be miserable if we do not. If I can but be near you, I shall be satisfied. But this is idle talking. I will not allow myself to think of such things till we have your father's answer. Morland says that by sending it tonight to Salisbury, we may have it tomorrow. Tomorrow, I know I shall never have courage to open the letter. I know it will be the death of me. A reverie succeeded this conviction, and when Isabella spoke again, it was to resolve on the quality of her wedding gown. Their conference was put an end to by the anxious young lover himself, who came to breathe his parting sigh before he set off for Wiltshire. Catherine wished to congratulate him, but knew not what to say, and her eloquence was only in her eyes. From them, however, the 8 parts of speech shone out most expressively, and James could combine them with ease. Impatient for the realization of all that he hoped at home, his adieus were not long, and they would have been yet shorter had he not been frequently detained by the urgent entreaties of his fair one that he would go. Twice was he called almost from the door by her eagerness to have him gone. Indeed, Morland, I must drive you away. Consider how far you have to ride. I cannot bear to see you linger so. For heaven's sake, waste no more time. There, go, I insist on it. The two friends, with hearts now more united than ever, were inseparable for the day, and in schemes of sisterly happiness the hours flew along. Mrs. Thorpe and her son, who were acquainted with everything, and who seemed only to want Mr. Morland's consent, to consider Isabella's engagement as the most fortunate circumstance imaginable for their family, were allowed to join their counsels, and add their quota of significant looks and mysterious expressions to fill up the measure of curiosity to be raised in the unprivileged younger sisters. To Catherine's simple feelings, this odd sort of reserve seemed neither kindly meant nor consistently supported, and its unkindness she would hardly have forborne pointing out had its inconsistency been less their friend. But Anne and Maria soon set her heart at ease by the sagacity of their I know what, and the evening was spent in a sort of war of wit, a display of family ingenuity, on one side in the mystery of an affected secret, on the other of undefined discovery, all equally acute. Catherine was with her friend again the next day, endeavouring to support her spirits and while away the many tedious hours before the delivery of the letters. A needful exertion, for as the time of reasonable expectation drew near, Isabella became more and more desponding, and before the letter arrived, had worked herself into a state of real distress. But when it did come, where could distress be found? I have had no difficulty in gaining the consent of my kind parents, and am promised that everything in their power shall be done to forward my happiness, were the first 3 lines, and in one moment all was joyful security. The brightest glow was instantly spread over Isabella's features, all care and anxiety seemed removed, her spirits became almost too high for control, and she called herself without scruple the happiest of mortals. Mrs. Thorpe, with tears of joy, embraced her daughter, her son, her visitor, and could have embraced half the inhabitants of Bath with satisfaction. Her heart was overflowing with tenderness. It was dear John and dear Catherine at every word. Dear Anne and dear Maria must immediately be made sharers in their felicity, and 2 dears at once before the name of Isabella were not more than that beloved child had now well earned. John himself was no skulker in joy. He not only bestowed on Mr. Morland the high commendation of being one of the finest fellows in the world, but swore off many sentences in his praise. The letter whence sprang all this felicity was short, containing little more than this assurance of success, and every particular was deferred till James could write again. But for particulars Isabella could well afford to wait. The needful was comprised in Mr. Morland's promise. His honour was pledged to make everything easy, and by what means their income was to be formed, whether landed property were to be resigned, or funded money made over, was a matter in which her disinterested spirit took no concern. She knew enough to feel secure of an honourable and speedy establishment, and her imagination took a rapid flight over its attendant felicities. She saw herself at the end of a few weeks, the gaze and admiration of every new acquaintance at Fullerton, the envy of every valued old friend in Putney, with a carriage at her command, a new name on her tickets, and a brilliant exhibition of hoop rings on her finger. When the contents of the letter were ascertained, John Thorpe, who had only waited its arrival to begin his journey to London, prepared to set off. "Well, Miss Morland," said he on finding her alone in the parlour, "I am come to bid you good-bye." Catherine wished him a good journey. Without appearing to hear her, he walked to the window, fidgeted about, hummed a tune, and seemed wholly self-occupied. "Shall not you be late at Devizes?" said Catherine. He made no answer, but after a minute's silence burst out with, "A famous good thing this marrying scheme, upon my soul, a clever fancy of Morland's and Belle S. What do you think of it, Miss Morland? I say it is no bad notion." "I am sure I think it a very good one. Do you? That's honest, by heavens. I am glad you are no enemy to matrimony, however. Did you ever hear the old song, going to one wedding brings on another? I say you will come to Belle's wedding, I hope. Yes, I have promised your sister to be with her if possible. And then twisting himself about and forcing a foolish laugh, I say then we may try the truth of this same old song. May we? But I never sing. Well, I wish you a good journey. I dine with Miss Tilney today and must now be going home. Nay, but there is no such confounded hurry. Who knows when we may be together again? Not but that I shall be down again by the end of a fortnight, and a devilish long fortnight it will appear to me. Then why do you stay away so long? Replied Catherine, finding that he waited for an answer. That is kind of you, however, kind and good-natured. I shall not forget it in a hurry. But you have more good nature and all that than anybody living, I believe. A monstrous deal of good nature, and it is not only good nature, but you have so much of everything. And then you have such, upon my soul, I do not know anybody like you. Oh dear, there are a great many people like me, I dare say, only a great deal better. Good morning to you. But I say, Miss Morland, I shall come and pay my respects at Fullerton before it is long, if not disagreeable. Pray do, my father and mother will be very glad to see you. And I hope, Miss Morland, you will not be sorry to see me. Oh dear, not at all, there are very few people I am sorry to see. Company is always cheerful. That is just my way of thinking. Give me but a little cheerful company, let me only have the company of the people I love, let me only be where I like and with whom I like, and the devil take the rest, say I, and I am heartily glad to hear you say the same. But I have a notion, Miss Morland, you and I think pretty much alike upon most matters. Perhaps we may, but it is more than I ever thought of, and as to most matters, to say the truth, there are not many that I know my own mind about. By Jove, no more do I. It is not my way to bother my brains with what does not concern me. My notion of things is simple enough. Let me only have the girl I like, say I, with a comfortable house over my head, and what care I for all the rest? Fortune is nothing. I am sure of a good income of my own, and if she had not a penny, why, so much the better. Very true, I think like you there. If there is a good fortune on one side, there can be no occasion for any on the other, no matter which has it, so that there is enough. I hate the idea of one great fortune looking out for another, and to marry for money I think the wickedest thing in existence. Good day, we shall be very glad to see you at Fullerton whenever it is convenient. And away she went. It was not in the power of all his gallantry to detain her longer. With such news to communicate and such a visit to prepare for, her departure was not to be delayed by anything in his nature to urge, and she hurried away, leaving him to the undivided consciousness of his own happy address and her explicit encouragement. The agitation which she had herself experienced on first learning her brother's engagement made her expect to raise no inconsiderable emotion in Mr. and Mrs. Allen. By the communication of the wonderful event, how great was her disappointment! The important affair which many words of preparation ushered in had been foreseen by them both ever since her brother's arrival, and all that they felt on the occasion was comprehended in a wish for the young people's happiness, with a remark on the gentleman's side in favour of Isabella's beauty, and on the lady's of her great good luck. It was to Catherine the most surprising insensibility. The disclosure, however, of the great secret of James's going to Fullerton the day before did raise some emotion in Mrs. Allen. She could not listen to that with perfect calmness, but repeatedly regretted the necessity of its concealment, wished she could have known his intention, wished she could have seen him before he went, as she should certainly have troubled him with her best regards to his father and mother, and her kind compliments to all the Skinners. Chapter 16. Catherine's expectations of pleasure from her visit in Milsom Street were so very high that disappointment was inevitable, and accordingly, though she was most politely received by General Tilney, and kindly welcomed by his daughter, though Henry was at home, and no one else of the party, she found, on her return, without spending many hours in the examination of her feelings, that she had gone to her appointment preparing for happiness which it had not afforded. Instead of finding herself improved in acquaintance with Miss Tilney, from the intercourse of the day, she seemed hardly so intimate with her as before. Instead of seeing Henry Tilney to greater advantage than ever in the ease of a family party, he had never said so little nor been so little agreeable, and in spite of their father's great civilities to her, in spite of his thanks, invitations, and compliments, it had been a release to get away from him. It puzzled her to account for all this. It could not be General Tilney's fault, that he was perfectly agreeable and good-natured, and altogether a very charming man, did not admit of a doubt, for he was tall and handsome and Henry's father. He could not be accountable for his children's want of spirits, or for her want of enjoyment in his company. The former she hoped at last might have been accidental, and the latter she could only attribute to her own stupidity. Isabella, on hearing the particulars of the visit, gave a different explanation. It was all pride, insufferable haughtiness and pride. She had long suspected the family to be very high, and this made it certain. Such insolence of behaviour as Miss Tilney's she had never heard of in her life. Not to do the honours of her house with common good breeding, to behave to her guest with such superciliousness, hardly even to speak to her. But it was not so bad as that, Isabella. There was no superciliousness, she was very civil. Oh, don't defend her. And then the brother, he who had appeared so attached to you, good heavens, well, some people's feelings are incomprehensible, and so he hardly looked once at you the whole day. I do not say so, but he did not seem in good spirits. How contemptible! Of all things in the world inconstancy is my aversion. Let me entreat you never to think of him again, my dear Catherine. Indeed he is unworthy of you. Unworthy, I do not suppose he ever thinks of me. That is exactly what I say, he never thinks of you. Such fickleness, oh, how different to your brother and to mine. I really believe John has the most constant heart. But as for General Tilney, I assure you it would be impossible for anybody to behave to me with greater civility and attention. It seemed to be his only care to entertain and make me happy. Oh, I know no harm of him, I do not suspect him of pride. I believe he is a very gentlemanlike man. John thinks very well of him and John's judgment. Well, I shall see how they behave to me this evening. We shall meet them at the rooms. And must I go? Do not you intend it? I thought it was all settled. Nay, since you make such a point of it, I can refuse you nothing. But do not insist upon my being very agreeable, for my heart, you know, will be some 40 miles off. And as for dancing, do not mention it, I beg. That is quite out of the question. Charles Hodges will plague me to death, I dare say, but I shall cut him very short. 10 to 1, but he guesses the reason, and that is exactly what I want to avoid, so I shall insist on his keeping his conjecture to himself. Isabella's opinion of the Tilneys did not influence her friend. She was sure there had been no insolence in the manners either of brother or sister, and she did not credit there being any pride in their hearts. The evening rewarded her confidence. She was met by one with the same kindness, and by the other with the same attention as heretofore. Miss Tilney took pains to be near her, and Henry asked her to dance. Having heard the day before in Milsom Street that their elder brother, Captain Tilney, was expected almost every hour, she was at no loss for the name of a very fashionable-looking, handsome young man, whom she had never seen before, and who now evidently belonged to their party. She looked at him with great admiration, and even supposed it possible that some people might think him handsomer than his brother, though in her eyes his air was more assuming, and his countenance less prepossessing. His taste and manners were beyond a doubt decidedly inferior, for within her hearing he not only protested against every thought of dancing himself, but even laughed openly at Henry for finding it possible. From the latter circumstance it may be presumed that, whatever might be our heroine's opinion of him, his admiration of her was not of a very dangerous kind, not likely to produce animosities between the brothers, nor persecutions to the lady. He cannot be the instigator of the 3 villains in horsemen's greatcoats, by whom she will hereafter be forced into a travelling chaise and 4, which will drive off with incredible speed. Catherine, meanwhile, undisturbed by presentiments of such an evil, or of any evil at all, except that of having but a short set to dance down, enjoyed her usual happiness with Henry Tilney, listening with sparkling eyes to everything he said, and in finding him irresistible, becoming so herself. At the end of the first dance, Captain Tilney came towards them again, and much to Catherine's dissatisfaction, pulled his brother away. They retired whispering together, and though her delicate sensibility did not take immediate alarm, and lay it down as fact, that Captain Tilney must have heard some malevolent misrepresentation of her, which he now hastened to communicate to his brother, in the hope of separating them forever, she could not have her partner conveyed from her sight without very uneasy sensations. Her suspense was of full 5 minutes' duration, and she was beginning to think it a very long quarter of an hour when they both returned, and an explanation was given by Henry's requesting to know if she thought her friend Miss Thorpe would have any objection to dancing, as his brother would be most happy to be introduced to her. Catherine, without hesitation, replied that she was very sure Miss Thorpe did not mean to dance at all. The cruel reply was passed on to the other, and he immediately walked away. "Your brother will not mind it, I know," said she, "because I heard him say before that he hated dancing, but it was very good-natured in him to think of it. I suppose he saw Isabella sitting down and fancied she might wish for a partner, but he is quite mistaken, for she would not dance upon any account in the world." Henry smiled and said, "How very little trouble it can give you to understand the motive of other people's actions." "Why, what do you mean?" "With you it is not. How is such a one likely to be influenced? What is the inducement most likely to act upon such a person's feelings, age, situation, and probable habits of life considered? But how should I be influenced? What would be my inducement in acting so and so?" "I do not understand you." "Then we are on very unequal terms, for I understand you perfectly well." "Me, yes, I cannot speak well enough to be unintelligible." "Bravo, an excellent satire on modern language. But pray tell me what you mean." "Shall I indeed? Do you really desire it? But you are not aware of the consequences. It will involve you in a very cruel embarrassment, and certainly bring on a disagreement between us." "No, no, it shall not do either. I am not afraid." "Well then, I only meant that your attributing my brother's wish of dancing with Miss Thorpe to good nature alone convinced me of your being superior in good nature yourself to all the rest of the world." Catherine blushed and disclaimed, and the gentleman's predictions were verified. There was a something, however, in his words which repaid her for the pain of confusion, and that something occupied her mind so much that she drew back for some time, forgetting to speak or to listen, and almost forgetting where she was, till, roused by the voice of Isabella, she looked up and saw her with Captain Tilney preparing to give them hands across. Isabella shrugged her shoulders and smiled, the only explanation of this extraordinary change which could at that time be given, but as it was not quite enough for Catherine's comprehension, she spoke her astonishment in very plain terms to her partner. "I cannot think how it could happen. Isabella was so determined not to dance." "And did Isabella never change her mind before?" "Oh, but because, and your brother, after what you told him from me, how could he think of going to ask her?" "I cannot take surprise to myself on that head. You bid me be surprised on your friend's account, and therefore I am. But as for my brother, his conduct in the business, I must own, has been no more than I believed him perfectly equal to. The fairness of your friend was an open attraction. Her firmness, you know, could only be understood by yourself." "You are laughing, but I assure you, Isabella is very firm in general." "It is as much as should be said of anyone. To be always firm must be to be often obstinate. When properly to relax is the trial of judgment, and without reference to my brother, I really think Miss Thorpe has by no means chosen ill in fixing on the present hour." The friends were not able to get together for any confidential discourse till all the dancing was over, but then, as they walked about the room arm in arm, Isabella thus explained herself. "I do not wonder at your surprise, and I am really fatigued to death. He is such a rattle, amusing enough if my mind had been disengaged, but I would have given the world to sit still." "Then why did not you?" "Oh, my dear, it would have looked so particular, and you know how I abhor doing that. I refused him as long as I possibly could, but he would take no denial. You have no idea how he pressed me. I begged him to excuse me and get some other partner, but no, not he. After aspiring to my hand, there was nobody else in the room he could bear to think of. And it was not that he wanted merely to dance, he wanted to be with me. Oh, such nonsense. I told him he had taken a very unlikely way to prevail upon me, for of all things in the world I hated fine speeches and compliments, and so then I found there would be no peace if I did not stand up. Besides, I thought Mrs. Hughes, who introduced him, might take it ill if I did not. And your dear brother, I am sure he would have been miserable if I had sat down the whole evening. I am so glad it is over. My spirits are quite jaded with listening to his nonsense. And then, being such a smart young fellow, I saw every eye was upon us." "He is very handsome indeed." "Handsome, yes, I suppose he may. I dare say people would admire him in general, but he is not at all in my style of beauty. I hate a florid complexion and dark eyes in a man. However, he is very well. Amazingly conceited, I am sure. I took him down several times, you know, in my way." When the young ladies next met, they had a far more interesting subject to discuss. James Morland's second letter was then received, and the kind intentions of his father fully explained. A living, of which Mr. Morland was himself patron and incumbent, of about £400 yearly value, was to be resigned to his son as soon as he should be old enough to take it. no trifling deduction from the family income, no niggardly assignment to one of 10 children. An estate of at least equal value, moreover, was assured as his future inheritance. James expressed himself on the occasion with becoming gratitude, and the necessity of waiting between 2 and 3 years before they could marry, being, however unwelcome, no more than he had expected, was borne by him without discontent. Catherine, whose expectations had been as unfixed as her ideas of her father's income, and whose judgment was now entirely led by her brother, felt equally well satisfied, and heartily congratulated Isabella on having everything so pleasantly settled. "It is very charming indeed," said Isabella with a grave face. "Mr. Morland has behaved vastly handsome indeed," said the gentle Mrs. Thorpe, looking anxiously at her daughter. "I only wish I could do as much. One could not expect more from him, you know. If he finds he can do more by and by, I dare say he will, for I am sure he must be an excellent good-hearted man. 400 is but a small income to begin on indeed, but your wishes, my dear Isabella, are so moderate. You do not consider how little you ever want, my dear." "It is not on my own account I wish for more, but I cannot bear to be the means of injuring my dear Morland, making him sit down upon an income hardly enough to find one in the common necessaries of life. For myself, it is nothing. I never think of myself." "I know you never do, my dear, and you will always find your reward in the affection it makes everybody feel for you. There never was a young woman so beloved as you are by everybody that knows you, and I dare say when Mr. Morland sees you, my dear child, but do not let us distress our dear Catherine by talking of such things. Mr. Morland has behaved so very handsome, you know. I always heard he was a most excellent man. And you know, my dear, we are not to suppose but what, if you had had a suitable fortune, he would have come down with something more, for I am sure he must be a most liberal-minded man." "Nobody can think better of Mr. Morland than I do, I am sure. But everybody has their failing, you know, and everybody has a right to do what they like with their own money." Catherine was hurt by these insinuations. "I am very sure," said she, "that my father has promised to do as much as he can afford." Isabella recollected herself. "As to that, my sweet Catherine, there cannot be a doubt, and you know me well enough to be sure that a much smaller income would satisfy me. It is not the want of more money that makes me just at present a little out of spirits. I hate money, and if our union could take place now upon only £50 a year, I should not have a wish unsatisfied. Ah, my Catherine, you have found me out. There's the sting. The long, endless 2 years and a half that are to pass before your brother can hold the living." Yes, my darling Isabella," said Mrs. Thorpe. "We perfectly see into your heart. You have no disguise. We perfectly understand the present vexation, and everybody must love you the better for such a noble, honest affection." Catherine's uncomfortable feelings began to lessen. She endeavoured to believe that the delay of the marriage was the only source of Isabella's regret, and when she saw her at their next interview as cheerful and amiable as ever, endeavoured to forget that she had for a minute thought otherwise. James soon followed his letter, and was received with the most gratifying kindness. Chapter 17. The Allens had now entered on the 6th week of their stay in Bath, and whether it should be the last was for some time a question, to which Catherine listened with a beating heart. To have her acquaintance with the Tilneys end so soon was an evil which nothing could counterbalance. Her whole happiness seemed at stake, while the affair was in suspense, and everything secured when it was determined that the lodgings should be taken for another fortnight. What this additional fortnight was to produce to her beyond the pleasure of sometimes seeing Henry Tilney made, but a small part of Catherine's speculation. Once or twice indeed, since James's engagement had taught her what could be done, she had got so far as to indulge in a secret perhaps, but in general the felicity of being with him for the present bounded her views. The present was now comprised in another 3 weeks, and her happiness being certain for that period, the rest of her life was at such a distance as to excite but little interest. In the course of the morning which saw this business arranged, she visited Miss Tilney, and poured forth her joyful feelings. It was doomed to be a day of trial. No sooner had she expressed her delight in Mr. Allen's lengthened stay than Miss Tilney told her of her father's having just determined upon quitting Bath by the end of another week. Here was a blow. The past suspense of the morning had been ease and quiet to the present disappointment. Catherine's countenance fell, and in a voice of most sincere concern she echoed Miss Tilney's concluding words, "By the end of another week." "Yes, my father can seldom be prevailed on to give the waters what I think a fair trial. He has been disappointed of some friends, a rival whom he expected to meet here, and as he is now pretty well, is in a hurry to get home." "I am very sorry for it," said Catherine dejectedly. "If I had known this before—" "Perhaps," said Miss Tilney in an embarrassed manner, "you would be so good, it would make me very happy if—" The entrance of her father put a stop to the civility, which Catherine was beginning to hope might introduce a desire of their corresponding. After addressing her with his usual politeness, he turned to his daughter and said, "Well, Elena, may I congratulate you on being successful in your application to your fair friend?" "I was just beginning to make the request, sir, as you came in." "Well, proceed by all means. I know how much your heart is in it. My daughter, Miss Morland," he continued without leaving his daughter time to speak, "has been forming a very bold wish. We leave Bath, as she has perhaps told you, on Saturday se'nnight. A letter from my steward tells me that my presence is wanted at home, and being disappointed in my hope of seeing the Marquis of Longtown and General Courtenay here, some of my very old friends, there is nothing to detain me longer in Bath. And could we carry our selfish point with you, we should leave it without a single regret. Can you, in short, be prevailed on to quit this scene of public triumph, and oblige your friend Elena with your company in Gloucestershire? I am almost ashamed to make the request, though its presumption would certainly appear greater to every creature in Bath than yourself. Modesty such as yours, but not for the world would I pain it by open praise. If you can be induced to honour us with a visit, you will make us happy beyond expression. 'Tis true, we can offer you nothing like the gaieties of this lively place. We can tempt you neither by amusement nor splendour, for our mode of living, as you see, is plain and unpretending, yet no endeavours shall be wanting on our side to make Northanger Abbey not wholly disagreeable." Northanger Abbey, these were thrilling words, and wound up Catherine's feelings to the highest point of ecstasy. Her grateful and gratified heart could hardly restrain its expressions within the language of tolerable calmness, to receive so flattering an invitation, to have her company so warmly solicited. Everything honourable and soothing, every present enjoyment, and every future hope was contained in it, and her acceptance, with only the saving clause of Papa and Mamma's approbation, was eagerly given. "I will write home directly," said she, "and if they do not object, as I dare say they will not." General Tilney was not less sanguine, having already waited on her excellent friends in Pulteney Street, and obtained their sanction of his wishes. "Since they can consent to part with you," said he, "we may expect philosophy from all the world." Miss Tilney was earnest, though gentle, in her secondary civilities, and the affair became in a few minutes as nearly settled as this necessary reference to Fullerton would allow. The circumstances of the morning had led Catherine's feelings through the varieties of suspense, security, and disappointment, but they were now safely lodged in perfect bliss, and with spirits elated to rapture, with Henry at her heart and Northanger Abbey on her lips, she hurried home to write her letter. Mr. and Mrs. Morland, relying on the discretion of the friends to whom they had already entrusted their daughter, felt no doubt of the propriety of an acquaintance which had been formed under their eye, and sent therefore by return of post their ready consent to her visit in Gloucestershire. This indulgence, though not more than Catherine had hoped for, completed her conviction of being favoured beyond every other human creature, in friends and fortune, circumstance and chance. Everything seemed to cooperate for her advantage. By the kindness of her first friends, the Allens, she had been introduced into scenes where pleasures of every kind had met her. Her feelings, her preferences, had each known the happiness of a return. Wherever she felt attachment, she had been able to create it. The affection of Isabella was to be secured to her in a sister. The Tilneys, they by whom, above all, she desired to be favourably thought of, outstripped even her wishes in the flattering measures by which their intimacy was to be continued. She was to be their chosen visitor. She was to be for weeks under the same roof with the person whose society she mostly prized. And, in addition to all the rest, this roof was to be the roof of an abbey. Her passion for ancient edifices was next in degree to her passion for Henry Tilney, and castles and abbeys made usually the charm of those reveries which his image did not fill. To see and explore either the ramparts and keep of the one or the cloisters of the other had been for many weeks a darling wish, though to be more than the visitor of an hour had seemed too nearly impossible for desire. And yet this was to happen, with all the chances against her of house, hall, place, park, court, and cottage. Northanger turned up an abbey, and she was to be its inhabitant. Its long, damp passages, its narrow cells and ruined chapel were to be within her daily reach, and she could not entirely subdue the hope of some traditional legends, some awful memorials of an injured and ill-fated nun. It was wonderful that her friends should seem so little elated by the possession of such a home, that the consciousness of it should be so meekly borne. The power of early habit only could account for it. a distinction to which they had been born gave no pride. Their superiority of abode was no more to them than their superiority of person. Many were the inquiries she was eager to make of Miss Tilney, but so active were her thoughts that when these inquiries were answered, she was hardly more assured than before of Northanger Abbey having been a richly endowed convent at the time of the Reformation, of its having fallen into the hands of an ancestor of the Tilneys on its dissolution, of a large portion of the ancient building still making a part of the present dwelling although the rest was decayed, or of its standing low in a valley, sheltered from the north and east by rising woods of oak. Chapter 18. With a mind thus full of happiness, Catherine was hardly aware that 2 or 3 days had passed away without her seeing Isabella for more than a few minutes together. She began first to be sensible of this, and to sigh for her conversation as she walked along the pump room one morning by Mrs. Allen's side without anything to say or to hear, and scarcely had she felt a 5 minutes' longing of friendship before the object of it appeared, and inviting her to a secret conference led the way to a seat. "This is my favourite place," said she as they sat down on a bench between the doors, which commanded a tolerable view of everybody entering at either. "It is so out of the way." Catherine, observing that Isabella's eyes were continually bent towards one door or the other, as in eager expectation, and remembering how often she had been falsely accused of being arch, thought the present a fine opportunity for being really so, and therefore gaily said, "Do not be uneasy, Isabella, James will soon be here." "Pshaw, my dear creature," she replied, "do not think me such a simpleton as to be always wanting to confine him to my elbow. It would be hideous to be always together, we should be the jest of the place. And so you are going to Northanger, I am amazingly glad of it. It is one of the finest old places in England, I understand. I shall depend upon a most particular description of it." "You shall certainly have the best in my power to give, but who are you looking for? Are your sisters coming?" "I am not looking for anybody. One's eyes must be somewhere, and you know what a foolish trick I have of fixing mine when my thoughts are 100 miles off. I am amazingly absent. I believe I am the most absent creature in the world. Tilney says it is always the case with minds of a certain stamp." "But I thought, Isabella, you had something in particular to tell me." "Oh yes, and so I have, but here is a proof of what I was saying. My poor head, I had quite forgot it. Well, the thing is this, I have just had a letter from John. You can guess the contents." "No, indeed, I cannot." "My sweet love, do not be so abominably affected. What can he write about but yourself? You know he is over head and ears in love with you." "With me, dear Isabella?" "Nay, my sweetest Catherine, this is being quite absurd. Modesty and all that is very well in its way, but really a little common honesty is sometimes quite as becoming. I have no idea of being so overstrained. It is fishing for compliments. His attentions were such as a child must have noticed, and it was but half an hour before he left Bath that you gave him the most positive encouragement. He says so in this letter, says that he as good as made you an offer, and that you received his advances in the kindest way. And now he wants me to urge his suit, and say all manner of pretty things to you. So it is in vain to affect ignorance." Catherine, with all the earnestness of truth, expressed her astonishment at such a charge, protesting her innocence of every thought of Mr. Thorpe's being in love with her, and the consequent impossibility of her having ever intended to encourage him. "As to any attentions on his side, I do declare, upon my honour, I never was sensible of them for a moment, except just his asking me to dance the first day of his coming. And as to making me an offer, or anything like it, there must be some unaccountable mistake. I could not have misunderstood a thing of that kind, you know. And as I ever wish to be believed, I solemnly protest that no syllable of such a nature ever passed between us. The last half hour before he went away, it must be all and completely a mistake, for I did not see him once that whole morning." "But that you certainly did, for you spent the whole morning in Edgar's buildings. It was the day your father's consent came, and I am pretty sure that you and John were alone in the parlour some time before you left the house." "Are you? Well, if you say it, it was so, I dare say, but for the life of me I cannot recollect it. I do remember now being with you and seeing him as well as the rest, but that we were ever alone for 5 minutes, however, it is not worth arguing about, for whatever might pass on his side, you must be convinced, by my having no recollection of it, that I never thought, nor expected, nor wished for anything of the kind from him. I am excessively concerned that he should have any regard for me, but indeed it has been quite unintentional on my side. I never had the smallest idea of it. Pray undeceive him as soon as you can, and tell him I beg his pardon. That is, I do not know what I ought to say, but make him understand what I mean in the properest way. I would not speak disrespectfully of a brother of yours, Isabella, I am sure, but you know very well that if I could think of one man more than another, he is not the person." Isabella was silent. "My dear friend, you must not be angry with me. I cannot suppose your brother cares so very much about me, and you know we shall still be sisters." "Yes, yes," with a blush, "there are more ways than one of our being sisters. But where am I wandering to? Well, my dear Catherine, the case seems to be that you are determined against poor John, is not it so?" "I certainly cannot return his affection, and as certainly never meant to encourage it." "Since that is the case, I am sure I shall not tease you any further. John desired me to speak to you on the subject, and therefore I have, but I confess, as soon as I read his letter, I thought it a very foolish, imprudent business, and not likely to promote the good of either. For what were you to live upon, supposing you came together? You have both of you something, to be sure, but it is not a trifle that will support a family nowadays. And after all that romancers may say, there is no doing without money. I only wonder John could think of it. He could not have received my last.